Welcome to another in our series of videos from Voyager Middle School Robotics. I'm going to show you today how to use SketchUp to create what I'm calling an ambigram, which is a word that looks different from two different directions. Some of you have seen these in two-dimensional designs, especially on tattoos and things like that. It looks like one word the right way. It looks like one word if you have it one way, and then if you flip it upside down, it looks like another word. It's the same text. We're going to do the same thing, but in 3 dimensions. It's a really easy project to do, but it's a very hard print to achieve on the 3D printer. So the purpose for us to do this is to do a later video about how to add support material and analyze a print for possible overhang situations and how to optimize things so that we can definitely make sure that we have something that can 3D print easily, reliably, and that won't take forever for us to hand finish later. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the Product Design and Woodworking Millimeters template like always. This one is going to be a little bit different because we're going to start with the 3D text tool, and the difference here is we're not going to use dimensions that make sense. We're going to use huge dimensions, and the reason for that is when you're using text, all these curved lines actually end up being in SketchUp a bunch of series of very small straight lines. And if you use text that was actually some size that you could accomplish on a normal 3D printer, those lines would be very small, fractions of millimeters, and SketchUp really hates trying to deal with those lines, and it gets very confused and very angry at you. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use at least 500 millimeters for the height of the letters, and at least 500 millimeters for how far the letters are extruded or push-pulled. This is the only place that I think SketchUp uses the word extruded. They use push-pull everywhere else, but that's the same meaning. We're going to have this text as a shape, and then it's going to automatically be push-pulled 500 millimeters. I like to use a bold font like Arial Black. I want to make sure it's as bold as possible. I also like to use capital letters, because if I use anything spindlier than that, the plastic is going to be actually where the letters are, and it just doesn't use enough plastic, and the objects just become very easy to break. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use all caps. It's a good idea to think about words, 2 words, pairs of words that go together or opposites. For this example, I'm going to use love, and I'm going to hit place. So again, this is way too big to 3D print, but it's still something that I need to do so that these curves in this O have a large enough size. You can even go bigger than this. It really doesn't matter. For the second word, the idea here is we're going to want to be able to look at it from above and have it say love, and look at it from this side and instead it'll say hate. So what we're going to do is we're going to place a second word, but this one I don't want to place flat on the surface. So a good trick to always do if you need a vertical surface is draw a rectangle, give it a push-pull, and now there's a vertical surface. Since that's a disposable one, I'm going to make it a group so it's easily deletable later. Now I can take and I can place hate. You'll notice that it's capital again and that it's 500 and 500 again. I'm going to place that, and I'm just going to click on this surface. Now, when you place a word on a surface like this, what you'll find is it's really hard to move it off that surface. It's glued to that surface. You can move it in that plane. So to fix that, what you can do is you can right-click and choose Unglue, or you could just do what I was planning on doing anyway and delete the surface. So now it's not glued anymore, and now I can move it separately. So if I use the Move tool again, I can just move that separately, and I can move it all over the place. Alright, so we are going to try and create one object, but obviously these would all be separate objects right now. So that's not ideal for us. We are going to separate these all into separate groups. So I'm going to take the Select tool, I'm going to right-click on this group and explode. Explode means to take a group and unmake the group. To take the group and explode it into all of its various parts. So you can see now I can select each individual surface. So after I do that, I'm going to triple-click each letter and make each letter its own separate group. This will group all of those edges and faces and all those different points of those letters so that they're individual groups like this. Once I've done that, I need to reposition them, and I think it's maybe an advantage to look at a 3/4 view here, but I kind of like to go to a straight down view, and if I really want to see it straight down, like with an orthographic projection, I need to switch my camera to parallel projection. It makes everything look a little weird from the side, but if I look at it from the top, it looks a lot better, I think, than perspective, where you can see these sides, even though you're looking at it straight from the top. So now I can see, even though these are three-dimensional, I can only see the two-dimensional parts of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the move tool, make sure nothing is selected, that way I can move any one of these things. And I'm going to move these letters over until that they're overlapping. This overlap is going to be their connection in plastic. So what you want to do is you want to avoid a very thin overlap because that will be fragile and break. And you want to avoid a really huge overlap because that will make it illegible. And you want to really especially avoid a single point overlap because that will make it not a solid group. So now I've got each of these groups overlapping like this. I can use the solid tools like outer shell, and I can combine them by clicking on them one at a time. And now this is all one thing. If I 3D printed this right now, I'd have the word love, which is interesting in and of itself, but not quite as cool as what I'm going to end up with in the end. So now I'm going to look at things from the front so I can deal with hate here. I'm going to do the same thing I just did for love. So that's explode, triple click, and maybe I'm going to orbit here so I can make sure I'm selecting the back and not just double clicking. Triple click, make group, triple click, make group, triple click, make group. And now I'm going to go back to the front view and I'm going to deselect and then move these over. Again, make sure your overlap is sufficient. Be careful with something like the T because you can very easily have sufficient overlap on one part and barely any overlap on the other. Make sure your overlap is sufficient. Then you use the solid tools again. If at some point using the solid tools you end up with not a group anymore, you can use the solid inspector to try and figure out why it's not a solid group, or you can try backing up a step and repositioning your letters. So now I've got two blocks. So in order to make it show through, what I need to do is put these on top of each other and then make it so that my object is only where these two things overlap. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to select a part of this object to move it that I know must line up with another corner. If I want these two things to take up exactly the same box, I'm going to move the lower left-hand corner of this box to the same spot as the lower left-hand corner of this box. So I'm going to take the move tool and I'm going to click on the lower left-hand corner, and then I'll click on the lower left-hand corner of the other one to snap it into location. So now I've got the two things overlapped, and you can see it's a little bit confusing as to which thing I'm clicking on because they're so overlapped. But you can see the boxes are not exactly the same. One of the boxes stretches a little bit further out. And if I do my intersection right now, those things won't have anything under them and they'll be cut off. I chose two words that were exactly the same length. If you used a word that was significantly longer than the other, you'll notice this in an exaggerated way. What you're going to need to do is you either need to stretch out the shorter word or compact the smaller word. So pick which word you want to resize. Like I'm going to resize the word love. Then you're going to use the scale tool. And instead of grabbing a corner here where I can scale the whole thing all at once, what I want to do instead is I'm going to grab the end point here and scale it just in that direction and stretch it in just that direction. And I'm going to hover over the end point of my other word so that I know that it's perfectly aligned. You can also do this to line up the other sides if for some reason they're not lined up. So now what I've got is I've got both words and they're both in such a way that they take up almost exactly the same box. So now I can use this intersect tool, which will only leave the overlap, and I'm going to click on one of my words and click on the other word, which can be a little bit tricky. And but you can probably figure it out because you'll see the selection change like that. You can just click. And if your words are big enough, SketchUp will have kept this a solid group. Otherwise, you might have to go in and fill little tiny holes, cut off little bits, things like that to make it a solid group again. Again, you can use this solid inspector download to do that. Or you might have to just try again, make it bigger, try again. Now you can see sort of the magic here. So it's this weird looking shape, but if I look at it straight on, it looks very much like the word hate. And if I look at it straight from above, it looks like love. And if this is an actual 3D printable real object that looks like both those words at the same time. And this is pretty amazing, especially for a certain audience. I haven't quite figured out which audience it is, but there's some people who really go nuts over these things. I call them ambigrams. You can use any two words that you'd like. You can even use very short and long words as long as you don't mind them being stretched out. In our next video, we will talk about how to deal with all of these terrible overhangs that make this almost impossible to 3D print. Almost impossible, but not quite.